Has it ever happened to you that someone smiles at you, but you can sense that the smile isn't genuine, or that a comment disguised as a joke leaves you with an unpleasant feeling, as if it were a subtle attack? Resentment in many relationships isn't expressed through open arguments or shouting, but rather in more subtle, covert ways, and for that reason, more dangerous. In this video, we're going to explore a topic that few dare confront: the signs of contempt hidden in everyday gestures. Because it's not always about the words that are spoken, but the actions that are taken, or even those that are left undone. Empty stares, ironic remarks, or intentional silences can reveal more than you might imagine. Psychologist and philosopher Mario Alonso once said, "What we deny within ourselves, we project on others." This idea leads us to an unsettling truth. Those who show us rejection or disdain often do so from their own emotional wounds. However, that doesn't lessen the impact it has on us. Today, I'm going to show you 12 clear signs that someone feels aversion toward you, even if they try to hide it. Believe me, these signs are closer than you think, even in relationships that seem close. Don't underestimate what you're about to learn, because this knowledge can transform the way you interpret human relationships and, more importantly, protect your emotional well-being. Stay with me until the end, because once you identify these signs, you'll have the tools to act. Before we continue, if this topic resonates with you, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Here we explore the depths of the human mind to help you understand what's happening around you and to protect yourself emotionally. Signs of rejection are not always expressed through harsh words. They are often whispered through everyday gestures that may seem harmless, but together tell a very different story. For example, think of that person who always shows up late to your meetings, even though they know how important they are to you. You might think it's just carelessness, but when this behavior repeats and their priorities always seem to come before yours, you might be facing a form of disdain disguised as indifference. Sarcasm is another effective tool in the arsenal of silent rejection. Has it ever happened that someone makes a seemingly innocent comment, but with an uncomfortable undertone? Something like, "Oh sure, you're always so perfect." On the surface, it sounds like a joke, but behind those words is the intent to minimize your accomplishments and dim your light. And the worst part is, if you react, they might accuse you of overreacting or lacking a sense of humor. Repressed emotions inevitably seek a way out, and contempt is no exception. In many relationships, this feeling is hidden in omissions. You may not give it much thought, but that person who constantly forgets to include you in plans or doesn't consult you on important decisions, are they truly being forgetful, or is it a way to show that they don't value you as they should? Think of a common situation. You're at a family gathering or at work, and you share something personal or meaningful. As you speak, someone looks away, checks their phone, or interrupts to change the subject. That small gesture, that lack of attention, hurts more than it should, doesn't it? Sometimes you don't need a direct confrontation to express rejection. Sometimes simply ignoring someone is enough to make the message loud and clear. And then there's intentional exclusion. Maybe they don't say it outright, but you feel it. You weren't invited to that dinner, to that meeting everyone talks about afterward, or maybe they didn't consult you on something that directly affects you. This isn't a coincidence. It's a way of drawing invisible lines, of sending a clear message. You don't belong here. Philosopher and psychologist Mario Alonso left us a warning. The shadow is everything we don't want to be, but also everything we don't recognize we are. It's likely that those who project contempt onto you do so because something about you reminds them of their own insecurities or fears. However, that doesn't mean you have to accept it. The real problem begins when these signs are so subtle that you start doubting yourself. Am I overreacting? Am I imagining things? No. These signs, although small, share something in common: their consistency. And that consistency is the key to recognizing them. A forced smile here, a sarcastic comment there. It all forms a pattern that, if you don't identify in time, can wear down your self-esteem and rob you of your inner peace. And we haven't even talked about one of the most harmful forms of hidden contempt: emotional manipulation. This can manifest in someone who uses your own words or past mistakes to humiliate you in front of others, or someone who shares personal information you confided in them, just to make you look bad. These kinds of behaviors aren't just meant to hurt you, they're also meant to influence how others see you. If you've ever felt that someone close to you acts this way, don't ignore it. Understanding these signs will not only help you protect yourself, but also give you clarity in deciding who deserves to stay in your life. But this isn't all. There are even more subtle and damaging ways in which this kind of hidden hatred can show up, and that's where we're going next. When a relationship is contaminated by resentment or hidden contempt, the signs aren't always obvious. It's like a slow burning fire inside. You don't see it, but you feel it. One of the most common and yet easiest to miss signs is disdain disguised as small oversights. Perhaps a friend forgets important dates, like your birthday, while remembering everyone else's with precision. Or maybe someone close ignores your achievements, but never misses a chance to highlight others. Coincidence? Hardly. These are like small invisible cracks in the foundation of a relationship. At first, they seem insignificant, but over time, if you don't identify them, they can destroy any bond. Mario Alonso Puig was right when he said, "What we deny in ourselves, we project onto others." That veiled contempt speaks less about you and more about the other person, about the inner shadows they are projecting onto you. Recognizing this is a first step to freeing yourself from its impact. Another way covert contempt can manifest is through support withdrawn at crucial moments. Imagine this. You're presenting a project you're excited about, explaining with enthusiasm the steps that led you to this point, and the person you expected support from simply responds with, "Oh, that's fine," or changes the subject without further comment. That lack of enthusiasm, that emptiness in their response, is a silent way of invalidating your effort and, deep down, your emotions. Then there are comments that seem innocent, but are actually loaded with hidden intentions. Perhaps someone says something like, "Oh, I hadn't noticed you were wearing new clothes. They're so basic, they look like the old ones." It seems like an insignificant remark, but what it really hides is an attempt to belittle you while hiding behind the excuse of honesty. This type of passive-aggressive interaction can be devastating because it directly attacks your self-esteem and, at the same time, makes you question whether you're interpreting things correctly. Now think about those moments when someone doesn't openly criticize you, but uses sarcasm to do so. Phrases like "just kidding, don't get mad," said after a hurtful comment, are a clear example. Sarcasm can be a fun way of communicating among close people, but when used repeatedly to attack, it becomes a disguised tool of aggression. The problem with this type of aggression is that it leaves little room for defense, as the person can always excuse themselves by saying it was just a joke. Exclusion is also a silent but extremely powerful weapon. Perhaps you're not invited to an important work meeting, or you find out about a dinner among friends you weren't invited to. At first, you might think it was an oversight, but if this happens repeatedly, the message becomes clear: you're not part of the circle. This type of rejection, though subtle, hurts deeply because it attacks one of our most essential human needs: to feel included, to feel we belong. And what happens when these behaviors become so routine that you start to normalize them? Perhaps you tell yourself it's not a big deal, that you're exaggerating. But you're not. As Mario Alonso Puig pointed out, collective consciousness often pushes us to ignore what deep down we know is true. It's time to stop justifying these attitudes and start seeing them for what they really are: signs of a problem that requires attention. There's something that becomes especially dangerous when these signs go undetected. They begin to influence how you perceive yourself. Little by little, the subtle message of rejection or contempt can infiltrate your mind, making you question your own worth, and this, without a doubt, is the most devastating of all. But we're not done yet. The most important part is yet to come, because the tools to protect yourself from these dynamics are within your reach. Even if it doesn't seem like it, there's a way to break free from these toxic relationships without blaming yourself for what you feel, and we're about to explore it. The way others treat us can become a distorted mirror of how we begin to see ourselves. If you constantly receive signals of rejection, even the subtlest ones, like disinterest in what you say or belittling your achievements, something inside you starts to doubt. It's like a drop that, though small, falls repeatedly in the same spot, slowly wearing down the rock. The problem is that often you don't realize that wear until it's already advanced. But there's something crucial you need to know. Others' actions do not define your worth. Even though these dynamics sometimes become so routine that you start to feel responsible, you're not. As Mario Alonso Puig taught, the projections others make onto you are more related to what they deny in themselves than anything you've done. However, that doesn't mean you should tolerate it. Learning to recognize these signs is the first step to protecting your emotional stability. Think of it this way. Each relationship you have, whether with a friend, a colleague, or even a family member, is like a scale. If you constantly feel you're giving more than you're receiving, that scale might be unbalanced, and that imbalance rarely happens by accident. For example, imagine you're always available for someone, but when you need support, that person suddenly disappears. That pattern, more than an oversight, is a choice, and the emotional impact it leaves shouldn't be ignored. One of the most insidious aspects of disguised hatred is that it rarely presents itself as a direct attack. Instead, it appears as a collection of small actions that, together, create a constant feeling of rejection. A call that never comes, a comment that minimizes your feelings, a look that makes you feel invisible. These actions aren't loud noises. They're constant whispers that erode your peace. And then there's the comparison game. Perhaps you hear that person speak wonders about someone else, highlighting what they do or have. While with you, they only point out your flaws or shortcomings. This type of behavior might seem innocent, but it's designed to make you feel less, to keep you in a place of insecurity. Because as Alonso Puig said, where power reigns, love is lacking. And those comparisons are meant to strengthen a bond, but to establish a hierarchy where you're always at a disadvantage. But how can you protect yourself from something so intangible? The key is to observe patterns, not isolated incidents. If someone has a bad day and is distant, it doesn't necessarily mean they hate you. However, if that attitude repeats consistently, it's time to pay attention. Consistency is what distinguishes accidental behavior from intentional one. The hardest thing to accept is that, many times, these signs come from people close to you, those you trust. The impact is greater because the expectations are too. But here's where your true power lies. You can choose how to react. It's not about confronting with anger or seeking blame, but about setting clear boundaries that protect your well-being. Recognizing these signs is not easy, but it is necessary. Ignoring them doesn't make them go away. On the contrary, they take root not only in how you see yourself, but in how others treat you. Human relationships are complex terrain, like a garden that must be constantly cared for. But when hidden resentment begins to sprout, it's like a weed that silently grows and spreads until it overtakes everything. Noticing these signs isn't just an act of self-defense. It's a way of protecting the most valuable thing you have, your inner peace and self-worth. One of the clearest signs of emotional wear is when someone close to you uses your insecurities as a weapon. Maybe in a casual conversation, they bring up something they know hurts you, with a smile that isn't sincere. It's not obvious, but the pain is real. This isn't just about hurting. It's a way of subtly controlling how you see yourself. So the real question is, how can you tell if someone is just having a bad day or if they're consistently undermining your self-worth? Mario Alonso often speaks about the power of awareness, the importance of looking inward not only to understand, but to set boundaries. Sometimes the hardest part isn't seeing the signs, it's accepting them. Silence, too, can be a powerful form of rejection. An unanswered message, a sudden goodbye, or a distant look. Small actions, perhaps, but together they create a sense of exclusion that wounds. Recognizing these dynamics and facing them is essential to preserving your emotional well-being and cultivating healthy relationships, those that nourish you, not drain you. Have you ever shared something important with someone, only to be met with indifference? That's not random. That silence, that lack of acknowledgement says, your feelings don't matter, and that could be more painful than direct criticism, because it leaves a void, as if you're talking to someone who's decided not to hear you. This is even harder when it happens in spaces that are supposed to be safe. Family, friendship, love. It's not about becoming paranoid. It's about learning to observe, like watching the current of a clear river. The surface may seem calm, but underneath, forces are moving. A simple way to identify these hidden currents is by observing how you feel after interacting with someone. If you consistently feel tired, uncomfortable, or insecure, it's a warning sign. It's not about judging others. It's about listening to your inner voice, that intuition we often ignore because we're afraid of what we might discover. The biggest challenge in these dynamics is that they're often hidden beneath gestures that seem kind. Maybe someone offers help, but in a way that makes you feel incapable, or they praise you in public. But with words that subtly belittle you, it's a dance of light and shadow. As Alonso says, it's part of the human psyche we don't always dare to look at. Recognizing these signs is not just brave, it's a way of reclaiming your power. You can't control what others think of you, but you can control how you respond. Every boundary you set, every time you choose to protect yourself, is an act of self-love, a declaration that you deserve to live in a space where you are respected and uplifted. But the journey doesn't end here. There's still more to uncover about how these emotional patterns affect your life, especially how to strengthen the relationships that help you grow and release the ones that only bring pain. The next step is becoming aware of how these dynamics affect your emotional and mental balance. It's like an invisible backpack filled with small stones. Each indifference, each passive-aggressive comment, each cold silence adds weight. At first, you don't feel it, but over time it becomes heavier, draining your energy, clouding your emotions, and damaging your other relationships. What's dangerous is the cyclical nature of it. When someone devalues you, you seek their validation, as if their approval could undo the hurt. But that only gives them more power over you and distances you from those who truly see your worth. As Alonso said, those who look outside dream, those who look inside awaken. And that awakening begins the moment you realize that you don't need validation from those who constantly belittle you. Emotional manipulation is especially dangerous because it binds you to destructive relationships. Imagine sharing a fear with someone, and they later use it against you. During an argument, they say, "You're too sensitive. That's why people leave you." That's not just painful. It plants seeds of doubt deep inside. Another subtle form of abuse hides behind jokes. Comments like, "You always complicate things," may sound innocent, but if repeated, they start shaping your self-image. You ask yourself, am I really like that? Am I overreacting? And slowly, that doubt changes the way you see yourself. What many don't realize is that this constant repetition creates micro-traumas. Unlike a major emotional wound, micro-traumas are small cuts to your identity, like drops of water wearing down stone. That's why it's so important not to ignore these signs. No word is just a word. No silence is just silence. But recognizing these signs doesn't always mean the relationship must end. Sometimes, the person is acting from their own unresolved wounds. And if there's openness and mutual respect, change is possible. But it takes two people willing to heal together. This brings us to a crucial question. How can you set boundaries when you're surrounded by these dynamics? The answer isn't simple, but it starts with something powerful. Recognizing that your worth does not depend on how others treat you. Boundaries aren't punishments. They are protections that reflect how much you value yourself. It's not selfishness, it's self-care. For now, I want to take a moment to reflect. How many times have you justified toxic behavior because you didn't want to confront it? How many times have you downplayed your emotions just to keep the peace? These questions are uncomfortable, but necessary, because behind each one is a truth you're ready to face. Reflecting on them can be like turning on a light in a dark room. Suddenly, you realize how many behaviors you've normalized, how many times you stayed silent to avoid conflict, and how many chances you've missed to stand up for yourself because you thought it wasn't worth it. But you know what? The most liberating thing is recognizing that you can always start over, no matter how long you've been in that dynamic. Setting boundaries can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you've never done it before. It's like learning to walk a tightrope. At first you wobble, you feel unsure, but with each step, you grow stronger. Once you begin to prioritize your needs, something shifts. Maybe those people react badly at first, because they were used to crossing your boundaries without consequences. But over time, you begin to notice something interesting. Healthy relationships grow stronger, and toxic ones start to fade away. As Alonso said, we can't change anything unless we accept it. Acknowledging that certain dynamics are harmful isn't an act of weakness. It's an act of courage, because by accepting it, you're opening the door to transform your environment. It's not about becoming cold or distrustful, but about being someone who knows what they deserve and is not willing to settle for less. Think of it like a filter. When you start setting boundaries, you filter out the people who truly care about your well-being from those who are just taking advantage of your tolerance. Imagine you're a glass full of water. If you're always giving and never let yourself refill, you'll eventually run dry. But when you begin to take care of yourself, you ensure you're full for the people and situations that really matter. However, there's something important you must keep in mind. Setting boundaries doesn't mean confronting people with aggression or cutting ties immediately. It's about clearly communicating what you are willing to accept and what you're not. For example, if someone constantly makes comments that make you uncomfortable, you can say something like, I appreciate our relationship, but those kinds of comments don't make me feel good. I prefer if you didn't say them. It's a simple yet powerful statement because it shows you value both the other person and yourself. This process can be especially challenging when signs of hidden hostility come from people you love or trust. But here's the thing. Love shouldn't hurt, and relationships based on respect shouldn't make you feel less. The real challenge isn't identifying those people, but accepting that sometimes distancing yourself from them is the only way to protect yourself. The more aware we are of these dynamics, the more we can learn to respond rather than react. Every boundary you set, every time you choose to prioritize your well-being, is a step toward more authentic life. And the best part is that when you start valuing yourself this way, you inspire others to do the same. It's a shift that not only transforms your relationships, but also the way you see the world. And if you're still wondering how to know if you're in a relationship that isn't good for you, there's a very clear sign. Do you feel like yourself when you're with that person? If you constantly feel the need to adjust who you are, downplay your achievements, or tolerate behaviors that hurt you, it's time to evaluate whether that relationship truly has a place in your life. But this doesn't end here. There are still specific strategies you can use to protect yourself emotionally and strengthen the connections that truly matter. One of the most powerful strategies to protect yourself emotionally is learning to recognize patterns. It's not about focusing on isolated actions, but looking at the bigger picture. For example, if someone forgets to congratulate you once, it could be an oversight. But if they consistently ignore your achievements or minimize your emotions, it's no longer a coincidence. Alonso spoke of the collective unconscious as a force guiding our behaviors. And in human relationships, patterns are its way of expressing itself. Learning to identify them is like discovering a hidden map that reveals the real intentions behind actions. Think of a relationship like a dance. When both people are in sync, the steps flow naturally, and although they may stumble occasionally, they quickly regain rhythm. But when one person chooses their own rhythm, completely ignoring the other, the dance loses harmony. The same happens in imbalanced relationships. If you always feel like you're the one adjusting, giving more, compromising to maintain peace, that dynamic is likely draining you more than you realize. And this is where an invaluable tool comes in: self-compassion. We're often our own harshest critics, blaming ourselves for things we know we didn't deserve. But it's important to remember that we're all learning. Like any change process, what matters is not what you allowed in the past, but what you decide to do from now on. Self-compassion not only helps you heal, but also gives you the strength to face difficult conversations and make choices that prioritize your well-being. A clear example of this is when you choose to express your boundaries. At first, you may feel insecure, fearing the other person will react badly or reject you. But every time you speak honestly, you're building a protective wall around yourself, not to isolate, but to filter what you allow in. If someone truly values your relationship, they will try to understand and respect those boundaries. And if they don't, that response is in itself a clear sign of how healthy that connection really is. Another key to strengthening your relationships is surrounding yourself with people who reflect the values you want in your life. This might mean seeking friends who support you unconditionally, colleagues who respect your ideas, or mentors who inspire you to grow. Alonso believed we attract into our lives what resonates with our own energy. So, the more you work on building your self-esteem and setting clear boundaries, the more you will attract people who share that same vibration. However, there is one aspect that is often overlooked: the power of silence, not as an act of rejection, but as a tool for reflection. Taking a moment to observe how you feel in certain relationships can be revealing. Do you feel lighter or heavier after speaking with someone? Does that person leave you with a sense of energy, or do they drain you completely? These are questions you can only answer when you allow yourself to pause and listen to what your intuition has to say. The path to more authentic relationships is not easy, but every step you take is a declaration of self-love. And the more you work on building a life aligned with your values, the clearer it becomes which relationships add to your life and which ones take away. But this is not where the journey ends. Understanding these dynamics is just the beginning. There is still much to explore about how to transform these experiences into lessons that push you toward a fuller and more balanced life. Once you begin to become aware of the dynamics around you, something amazing happens. You free yourself from the burden of trying to control them. You realize that you cannot change what another person feels, but you can decide what space you allow them to occupy in your life. It's like opening the windows of a dark room and letting the light in. That clarity allows you to see which relationships are built on a solid foundation and which ones wobble on ground filled with unspoken resentments or expectations. A crucial point in this process is learning to differentiate between a natural conflict and a toxic pattern. All relationships have moments of tension. It's part of human coexistence. However, when you face a person who constantly undermines your self-esteem, who makes you question your worth, or who ignores your boundaries, you're not facing a simple conflict. You're facing a cycle that, if not stopped, can wear you down emotionally. To break free from that cycle, you need two things: courage and strategy. Courage will help you face those uncomfortable conversations you've been avoiding. Strategy, on the other hand, involves choosing your words carefully, not to attack or defend, but to communicate what you need in a clear and firm way. For example, instead of saying, "You always make me feel bad," you could opt for, "When these things happen, I feel hurt. I want us to talk about how we can handle this better." In this transformation, there is also space for forgiveness, but not the type of forgiveness that validates the other person's behavior, but the kind that frees you from resentment. As Alonso said, "He who does not look inward gets lost outward." Forgiving does not mean allowing them to cross your boundaries again. It means letting go of the emotional weight you carry with you so you can move forward. Imagine you're climbing a mountain with a backpack full of stones. Every time you choose to forgive, you take a stone out of that backpack. At first, the path is still steep, but with every stone you leave behind, the climb becomes a little lighter, and over time, you begin to notice the scenery around you, rather than focusing only on how difficult the ascent is. But it's not all about letting go. It's also important to surround yourself with people who lift you up, who support you in difficult times, and who celebrate your achievements as if they were their own. These are the relationships that are worth it, the ones that feed your soul rather than drain it. When you invest time in building genuine connections, you create a support network that strengthens you even in the most challenging times. A practical way to identify these relationships is by paying attention to how you feel after each interaction. If you feel motivated, understood, or simply at peace, that's a sign that that person brings something positive into your life. On the other hand, if you constantly feel drained, anxious, or doubting yourself, it may be time to reevaluate the place that relationship occupies in your life. This process of evaluation and change is not easy, but every step you take brings you closer to a more authentic version of yourself. And that authenticity has a powerful effect. It begins to attract what you truly need while filtering out what no longer has a place in your life. The most beautiful thing about this journey is that it not only transforms you, but also the people around you. Because by setting your boundaries, you teach them how to value you and how to value themselves. However, this is just the beginning. There is much more to explore about how to identify those dynamics that seem harmless, but are actually red flags in our relationships. And as you move forward on this path, every decision you make will be an affirmation of your strength and your right to build a life that reflects who you truly are. As you begin to reevaluate your relationships, you realize something powerful. You're not looking for perfection. You're looking for balance. It's not about surrounding yourself with people who always agree with you, but with those who respect you even when they don't. These types of relationships are not only healthy, but they also propel you to grow. They are like a sturdy tree you can lean on when the wind blows stronger. However, the real challenge is not always out there. It's within. Sometimes, the dynamics we tolerate reflect how we treat ourselves. Alonso described it as a shadow, that set of aspects of our personality that we repress because we believe they are unacceptable. But the more you ignore that shadow, the more it reflects in your relationships. That is, what you tolerate in others is often a mirror of what you tolerate in yourself. A clear example of this is when someone constantly criticizes your decisions or minimizes your emotions, and you decide not to say anything. You might think that by staying silent, you're avoiding problems. But in reality, you're reinforcing the idea that your feelings don't matter. That's one of the reasons why learning to listen to your intuition is so important, because your body and emotions are always speaking to you. You just need to pay attention. Imagine you're in a room full of echoes. Every word you say comes back to you louder, clearer. This is how your relationship with yourself works. If you speak to yourself with respect and validate your emotions, that same respect returns to you from the outside. But if you constantly criticize yourself or ignore what you feel, the relationships around you begin to reflect that same dynamic. This doesn't mean you need to be perfect or have all the answers. It's about starting with small steps. A simple example might be pausing for a moment when someone crosses a boundary and asking yourself, how does this make me feel? That question, though basic, has the power to completely change your perspective. Because once you identify how you feel, it's easier to decide what to do about it. Another tool you can use is time. Sometimes, the best way to understand a relationship is to observe how it evolves when you take a little distance. If that person truly values a connection, they will seek to approach you in a genuine way. But if their reaction is indifference or even resentment, it's a clear sign that their intentions are not aligned with your well-being. It's important to remember that change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, and like any process, it requires patience and compassion towards yourself. There will be moments when you doubt, when you feel the temptation to fall back into old patterns simply because they're comfortable. But every time you choose to prioritize your well-being, even if the step is small, you're building a stronger foundation for yourself. The more you work on this, the more you'll begin to notice something fascinating. Healthy relationships feel like natural, effortless. You don't have to fight for attention or justify your emotions. They just flow. And the best part is, you start to realize that you deserve exactly that, not less. But this path doesn't end here. You still need to maintain these relationships in balance and know what to do when certain patterns persist despite your efforts. The key is not just identifying these dynamics, but knowing how to handle them in a way that keeps you moving toward a fuller and more authentic life. When you start experiencing healthier relationships, something in you changes deeply. It's as if you can finally breathe fresh air after being in a room closed off for too long. This change not only transforms the quality of your connections, but also the way you perceive yourself. You begin to notice that you no longer feel the need to justify your place in anyone's life, and that inner security is a foundation on which you can build genuine, lasting relationships. However, there is something crucial you must not ignore. Toxic relationships rarely disappear without resistance. When you begin to set boundaries, you may face criticism or defensive attitudes. You might even be accused of being selfish or insensitive. These reactions are a response to the shift in dynamics. The key is to remember that you're not being cruel. You're protecting yourself. As Alonso mentioned, what we don't confront within ourselves, we will find as fate. In other words, if you allow the same dynamics to continue repeating, they will eventually trap you again. In those moments of doubt, think of your relationships as a garden. For something beautiful to grow, you first need to pull out the weeds. It's an uncomfortable and sometimes painful process, but it is absolutely necessary. Because if you let those weeds stay, they will end up suffocating the flowers you are trying to cultivate. The same goes for connections that drain you. As hard as it may be, learning to let them go is an act of love towards yourself. But there's more you can do to strengthen your environment. Surround yourself with positive examples. Look for people who already live the dynamics you wish to incorporate into your life. It could be a friend who always listens attentively, a colleague who respects your ideas, or even a figure you admire for how they set boundaries without losing empathy. These people are like beacons in the fog. They show you that not only is it possible to have healthy relationships, but that the effort is also worth it. As you begin to integrate these new behaviors, you might notice something interesting. Your perspective on conflict also changes. Instead of fearing it, you see it as an opportunity to deepen the relationship or even to strengthen your boundaries. For example, if someone reacts negatively to your new boundaries, instead of feeling guilty, you can see it as a sign that the connection needs reassessment. However, it's important to remember that not all relationships have a clear ending. Some fade slowly, while others may go through periods of distance and reconciliation. The essential thing is not to lose sight of your own values and needs. When you stand firm in what is important to you, the people who truly value your presence will find a way to adapt. An important detail in this process is being patient with yourself. You are undoing years, perhaps decades, of patterns that have kept you in cycles of dissatisfaction. There will be days when you step back, when you question if all this effort is worth it, and the answer is always yes. Each small step you take toward more authentic relationships is a step toward a fuller and more balanced life. Finally, don't forget to acknowledge your progress. Each boundary you set, every time you choose to surround yourself with people who value you, is a victory. And although the path may seem long, every step counts. Because in the end, what you're building is not just a healthy environment, but a stronger and more authentic version of yourself. But there's more to discover. The most useful signals, those little details that often go unnoticed, have the power to reveal much about our connections. Identifying them could make the difference between repeating old patterns and moving towards something entirely new. Sometimes, the smallest signals are the loudest. A comment that arrives at the wrong time, a glance that avoids meeting yours, or even a tone of voice that seems too neutral when it should have enthusiasm. These details are like the stitches in embroidery. Individually, they may seem insignificant, but together they reveal a pattern you can't ignore. It's important to pay attention to how people react to your successes. Do they genuinely congratulate you, or does their enthusiasm seem forced? A sign of disinterest disguised as neutrality can be more painful than direct criticism because it leaves a sense of emptiness. It's like they're saying, "I don't care enough to react." And although it may seem like a simple omission, that lack of support speaks much more about the relationship than you imagine. Mario Alonso explored how our repressed emotions find ways to manifest in our interactions, often in ways we aren't even aware of. This means that when someone acts in a passive-aggressive or distant way with you, it doesn't always have to do with you, but with something that person is facing internally. But understanding this doesn't mean you should accept being a constant target of these projections. A clear example is when someone uses sarcasm as a tool to express resentment. It may start with something seemingly harmless, like, "Oh, sure, you got it all under control as always." But behind that phrase lies an emotional charge that cannot be overlooked. The key to handling these situations is not to take them personally, but also not to ignore them. A direct response, such as, "What did you mean by that?" can open a conversation that brings to light what's really going on. Another subtle signal that deserves attention is how people handle disagreements with you. A healthy relationship doesn't need both parties to agree on everything, but it does require mutual respect, even in differences. If someone constantly seeks to invalidate your opinions or changes the subject when you talk about something important, you are seeing a signal that this person is not willing to value your perspective. But it's not all about identifying external behaviors. A crucial part of this process is also observing your own reactions. Do you constantly find yourself justifying someone's behavior, even when you know it's hurting you? Are you afraid of confronting because you fear losing a relationship? These responses are clear indicators that, on some level, you have begun to accept less than you deserve. This is where the power of introspection comes in. Taking time to reflect on how certain dynamics make you feel not only helps you better understand your emotions, but also gives you the clarity to decide which relationships are worth maintaining and which need to change. It's not about blaming or victimizing yourself, but about regaining control over your emotional life. This journey of self-discovery and reevaluation is not linear. There will be days when you feel strong and able to set clear boundaries, and others when you doubt your decisions. But every step, no matter how small it seems, is a victory. Because with each boundary you set, with each relationship you decide to transform or let go, you're moving toward a freer and more authentic version of yourself. There are still many useful behavioral cues you might be overlooking, but once you identify them, you can disarm their impact. The most important thing is to remember that you have the power to decide what kind of energy you allow into your life and what kind of relationships you are willing to build. Recognizing the subtle signals in relationships not only helps protect you, but also gives you the opportunity to set a higher standard for the connections you allow in your life. Every time you choose to say no to behavior that hurts you, you are opening space for more meaningful and balanced relationships. It's like cleaning a foggy glass. Suddenly, everything looks clearer, brighter, and what once seemed blurry now makes sense. One of the most effective ways to strengthen this clarity is by observing how your energy changes in the presence of certain people. There are those who, without saying much, manage to make you feel calm, valued, and motivated. On the other hand, there are those who, with barely a few words, manage to sow doubt or discomfort. Paying attention to this difference is key to knowing which connections are aligned with your well-being. For example, if you share good news with someone and that person quickly changes the subject or responds indifferently, that moment may seem minor, but in reality, it's a window into their true attitude toward you. Mario Alonso stated that repressed emotions tend to find indirect outlets, and this lack of enthusiasm could be a sign of jealousy or resentment that the other person doesn't know how to handle openly. Thank you for staying until the end. Your time and energy are valuable, and I'm honored that you share them here. If this content has inspired you or added value, join this community by leaving the keyword revelation in the comments. I'll send you a special greeting in the next video. Here, we don't just share knowledge, we awaken consciousness. Because on this channel, words don't just inform, they transform.